welcome to another Teach Tuesday video. This is the second in a short series of scenario-based videos focusing on distance education. Today's scenario is synchronous distance lectures, sometimes known instead as point-to-point or live streaming courses. Last time, we introduced the series from Instructional Services 1034 on the main campus. Today, Scott Berg of Client Services will be showing us another distance ed room, Mac 137, also on the main campus. These are both rooms specially configured for this mode of instruction. Then join us back here, where Todd will help provide us with a few key instructional design considerations.
My name is Scott Berg. I work with IT Client Services, formerly ATS or Academic Technology Services. I'm a classroom support technician, and I'm the lead distance education support technician. So yeah, we're in the Mac 137 distance education room, and we're just here to talk about tips for success when teaching with this equipment to a far site. Sure, so the main difference is that you have students that aren't physically here, and the way that you communicate with them is using the cameras and the microphones in the room. So that's kind of the number one thing that you have to pay attention to in a room like this, where you wouldn't in a normal classroom, is you have to pay attention to where is the camera pointed. There's a camera in the back of the room pointed towards the instructor, and there's a camera in the front of the room pointed towards the students. You can freely switch between the two using the touch panel on the desk here. So as you're teaching, it's just kind of important to now and again check in on one of your two screens in the back of the room. Make sure you have the camera pointed at you if you're talking, or if you're doing student work, switch it over to the students. And then just making sure your mic is turned on is very important as well, because if your mic's off, the far students won't hear you. So how the video conferencing works is that both sides have two screens in the front of the room that the students watch, and then usually there's two confidence monitors for the instructor in the back of the room. So your students on the far side will have two screens in the front. Typically what you have is a screen that has the people on it, so in this case probably you, and then a screen that has the content, which would be your PowerPoint, or if you have something on a document camera, or a DVD, or anything you want to show the class will be on that screen. If you're not sharing any content at all, usually the second monitor then doubles as the students will see themselves physically. So a good thing to keep in mind when you're lecturing in this room is that using the technology does have a little bit of a cognitive tax. So one of my main recommendations is, before you teach in one of these rooms, is to schedule a time with us to come to the room beforehand and practice the technology a little bit. Practice zooming and panning around the cameras, practice turning content on and off, practice looking at both screens to see, hey, this is where I'll see where my camera's pointed, this is where I'll see the students, just to get comfortable with the technology before you try teaching. I've seen instructors come in here without doing that and really struggle for the first couple weeks of their class. Every single time they want to switch a camera, they'll have to stop and think, or they'll go long periods of time with the camera kind of pointed at the students while they're lecturing, when that's not ideal. You want the far side students to be able to see you. So another thing you can help with that is to encourage your students at the start of the semester to advocate for themselves if something goes wrong, especially the students that aren't in the room with you. Make sure to encourage them to interrupt class if ever they're having any problems hearing you, if your camera's not pointed where they think it should be, if they can't see your slides. It can be difficult for you as the instructor in the room to really always catch when you're not sending the right thing to the far side students. But those students will know, but oftentimes they won't readily want to interrupt class. So just make sure to stress to them that their experience is important and that they should speak up for themselves, because you want them to have as good as experience as the students in the room. Another thing to encourage is your students in the room, make sure they're always turning on their microphones when they're asking you a question. Even though you don't need the microphone to hear it yourself, the students on the far side won't hear the question if your students aren't using their microphones. Sure. So you can do group work in a distance ed course like this. Kind of one of the constraints is that your small groups should probably be together geographically. So your students on the far side could split off into their own groups, and your students here should split off into their own groups. But the problem is with having kind of mixed geographically groups is that there is no private channel on the mics, right? So if if one student is talking to another student, you know, in a different room, that whole room hears the sound. There's no like pair of headphones or anything. So that small group collaboration kind of has to have everybody in the same room for those small groups. There are some tables kind of on the outskirts of this room that the students could go to and work together. And then when it's time to come back and present, they can just sit back in their normal seats with the microphones. Sure. So again, I would contact our office and we can give you some basic training on all of this. One thing to know is that the video conferencing technology, it's a professional Polycom codec. It primarily talks to other rooms with the same kind of professional technology. If you wanted to use this room for a Skype meeting or anything, you're really not leveraging the cameras and the microphones that are in this room right now. There are some bridging technologies we're looking forward to obtaining in the future that kind of make that possible, where you can use the nice cameras and mics with somebody sitting on their computer or, you know, a non-DE classroom. But primarily, if you want to use these nice microphones, be able to share with 2 screens, use the nice cameras, you have to connect with a room with similar equipment. Now, all of our branch campuses have at least 2 rooms on each campus that are equipped with this DE technology. So if you're teaching a course for DE to Manitowoc, Marinette, Sheboygan, they will have a room that can connect with this room. Yeah, so a few other things I want to touch on here is that every room, if the instructor's not in the room, there should be a facilitator, which is kind of like a TA that works with the students in that room, that's kind of in charge of pointing their cameras around and then advocating for the students or being able to call help on that side if something isn't going wrong. So make sure to work with your facilitator. They can do, you know, anything for you. If you want to hand out participation prizes to your class, get the facilitator with some of those prizes. They can hand them out to the students. Or, you know, if you want to use like a ball to throw around for a group conversation, I've seen this happen with a French class. You know, you can have a ball physically in the room with you and then give the facilitator a ball and they can toss it to the students in there if, you know, if you're using that for participation and things like that. So make sure to have good communication with them because they're really your eyes and ears on the ground in those rooms. And then another thing I would stress is that, you know, really talk with me when you're teaching in this room. If something doesn't seem like it's working as well as it should, or you have a problem in a class, make sure to reach out to me or my office and let us know, because if you don't tell us, I don't really know if something's wrong. If you do tell us, I'll do my best effort to try to fix it before your next class.
All right, Todd. Now that we've got a grasp on the specifics of a distance ed room like MAC 137 or IS 1034, what are some of the key takeaways from an instructional design perspective in a room like that?
Yeah, good question. I think the first thing I would say is practice before you play, right? Scott talked about a cognitive tax that you pay when you are toggling back and forth between different rooms, and I think it's better to prepay that tax before you're actually live in the classroom. So going into a room and just sort of practicing what it's like switching back and forth is a good thing to do, and Scott and his cohorts in client services are definitely happy to help people do that. The second thing I would say is making sure that you have a facilitator in some way in each place, so that someone who's designated to be the person to handle communication issues between rooms. So if there is a technical issue, or if you're going to have some planned give and take between the rooms, some discussion, have someone there in each room who's sort of the facilitator for that room, who's going to do the chats, or who's going to do the talking, is an important thing. And you can even make that part of your office hours every week. You could have let your student facilitators know, sort of what your lesson plan is for the week, and then you sort of say, okay, these are the types of things that I want to get out of discussion, so that they can make sure that they're your eyes and ears in those remote locations, so that you're sort of getting what you need to know from all those different places. And then the final thing is, I would say, well, 2 more things. One is that, pros and cons. The other thing, the last thing I would say is that less is more. That having a lot of animations in your slides, having a lot of things you're going back and forth in between, maybe lessen the transitions that you're going to do. So making sure that every time you make a transition is a potential for error, for something to go wrong. So maybe do all your lecture, then all your discussion, then all your regroup. so that you're not necessarily toggling back and forth, which is different, I think, if you're just all in the same room at the same time, where I think you want to break things up into smaller chunks. I mean, I think bigger chunks is probably good in the distance ed environment. And then finally, we're here to help. That if you're all of a sudden thrust into teaching in a new modality, Client Services and the Center for the Advancement of Teaching and Learning are here to help you. So you can contact us at the center with cattle@uwgb.edu and contact Client Services at helpdesk@uwgb.edu.
Okay. And then one other thing that I think maybe people are wondering is, what if we don't have access to a room like this and we still want to give this kind of synchronous lecture? Can we still do it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think, it's all about trade-offs, right? I think that, one of the big trade-offs of being in one of those fully functional rooms is that it's limited to about 24 to 30 students. And so many people teach classes that are much bigger than that, or they teach classes that are smaller than that. And so that you want to be able, you don't always want to, you can't always schedule those rooms to suit the class that you have. So you can do things in using a tool called Blackboard Collaborate, which we have in this room here. We're in Woodhall 216 right now, which is a room that's, it has a capacity that's larger than Mac Hall 137, but it's actually a physically smaller room. But you could turn this room into a lecture room if you wanted to, and we're doing that right now with a program called Blackboard Collaborate.
And what it does is you can see that I have a PowerPoint up on the screen. There is a chat function, so there's a possibility of give and take, and then there's a video camera, so students can see me. So as Scott was saying, you're limited to the reach of the microphone. So in this case, the reach of the microphone that I'm using is this webcam here, and it's limited to a relatively small distance. So I'm sort of stuck in this place, at least during the time when I am conveying information to students, right? Similarly with the camera. If students want to communicate back to the sending room, they can do that through the chat function. They could also, if they were video enabled, if they had video cameras, they could, they would appear as another little square on the bottom of the screen, and they could talk as well. And so similarly, I think to what Scott was saying, it's good to have a facilitator in each room to kind of manage that interaction between the rooms. Students can also join over the phone if they want to. So you could give out the number, and so that if they didn't have a camera, they would still have it, access through a conference call type scenario. And then also similar to the distance ed rooms that Scott was talking about, I think it's probably good to really block off your class, and so to have a section that's lecture, where you're conveying information, then have a section that's discussion, then have a section that's debrief, and so that you're not, the more you toggle back and forth between tasks, the more chance you have of something going wrong. So to sort of maybe do your lecture part in a block, give students a question to talk about in a block, and then have a debrief in a block in which a designated student representative from each campus would be the person giving information either in the chat or through a microphone or through the phone on the receiving end. And again, if you're curious in how this works, feel free to contact the Center for the Advancement of Teaching and Learning. We'd be happy to talk through this with you.
I think that sounds great, and we'll probably talk more about these same tools in the next video, which will be on discussion-based scenarios, which I think this lends itself to particularly well.
Yeah, you're right, for sure.
So I'm going to ask our viewers to tune in next time. Thanks for watching.
See ya.